Greetings, greetings, greetings. It is I, your King, King Clifford Jefferson, Senator Godfrey, the fifth Counterband Jew, and the fourth ruler of Jerusalem. I am the reincarnation of King Edgar the Peaceful, the King of Peace, whom we and you should know as the one they call Jesus Christ, or the King of Peace. We are here today with another marvelous lesson to give you a better and broader understanding of who you are as English heirs and successors from the Kingdom of England, as well as that of the Empire of Albion. I have by my side, as always, Archbishop Belmont from the House of Belmont, and CA Core Judah from the House of Murphy are here doing the marvelous work to bring this marvelous truth to our people and to get them to understand that as of right now, they're in a state of hell. So I'll let the brother say a couple of words and we can get on with this marvelous lesson.
Greetings, brothers and sisters from the Kingdom of England, Empire Albion. It is I, Archbishop Belmont from the Noble House of Belmont. And today is January 13th, which is the day before the Berber New Year, as well as our King's solar return. And this lesson is going to be one of those lessons that should have fireworks going off in the background after you get done listening to it, because it should be a time for you to rejoice and knowing that those who have come to save you, to bring you home, have been here the whole time. Now, as the King just said, you look at the image of King Edgar the Peaceful right here on the screen. And as King Edgar the Peaceful, pretty much on the checkerboard, which we can call the exchequer, flag or floor, whatever, underneath or over, the planet. And this is symbolizing that the planet right now is hell, because the heirs don't know that they are in a state of forgetfulness. Only way for you to come out of forgetfulness is you have to trace your origins going back to time immemorial 1189. But we have done that so humbly for you to show you with these videos that we've been posting since last year, that you are home and all you need to do is just recover your conscience. And as me being the holder of the King's conscience as Archbishop, it is my humble duty to continue to keep enforcing and bringing the King's will to the people as a whole, so that way they can see that we're not playing. So with that being said, please pay attention to this lesson, because it's one of the best lessons I feel that we didn't had up here, that we're pulling out of the treasure trove. And I let the rest of the introduction go to our co-adjutor, Noble Murphy from the Noble House of Murphy.
Appreciate it. Greetings, everyone. Peace and love to everyone at the sound of my voice. I trust all is well with those dutifully doing their studentry in whatever particular field of study. I hope that this reaches your ears peacefully. I'm here to be of assistance to my King and Archbishop in this marvelous work, and will continue to be a great steward in this lesson. Again, I trust all is well. Put on a listening cap. Today is the day, Judgment Day. I yield the floor, Archbishop. We can begin.
Well said, both Archbishop and CA. Once again, I am your King. I'm here as I'm obligated to do to fulfill the prophecy that was ordained from time immemorial. As Archbishop showed you, that as you can see, this is the King of Peace, King Edgar the Peaceful, better known as King Edgar Jefferson, because the name Jefferson or Godfrey means peaceful place or peaceful territory. And this was the only king throughout history who had a ring that was a ring without any wars or any conflicts. Okay, so it's best to do the diligence to know who this is honorable and worthy to be called the Son of Man, King Edgar the Peaceful, who I am the reincarnation of. When I reattach my locks, you will definitely see our clear resemblance. That's yet to come. Once again, well said, Archbishop and CA from the respective houses, as being affiliated with the English Church of England. We formed from the English Church of England. That was a reformation from the Church of England, established by Henry VIII in 1534, then reformed in 1558 by Queen Elizabeth I, which established the Elizabeth religious settlement for the Elizabeth's religious settlement of 1701 Act, dealing with the Protestant and Anglican churches, was broken down into many other churches, i.e. branches, which we're going to discuss today. And realize that a lot of these branches that our ancestors were now a part of, or still today are a part of, are actually descended from the English Church of England. As a result of the reformation of the church, there has been a reformation of your mind. And as a result of that reformation, you're not informed of who you are. And if you're not informed, then you're not informed, or what I should say, the proper form for you to act accountable. So that's our job. And, I'd like just to say this for the record, that if those who are understand contract law, there's 1606 charter issued by the de facto King James in 1606. And if you go to clause, if I'm not mistaken, 15, 16, or 17, throughout the whole article, throughout the whole actual charter, it speaks about the obligee and the obligor. The king, i.e. the monarch, his heirs and successors, under the monarch of the Kingdom of England, not of Scotland, of the Kingdom of England, because there were parliaments consisting of England, Ireland, and Scotland. But he's speaking under the kingship of England as the first king of England, because he was assumed to be the first king of Scotland. We'll go through that in another lesson. But we're speaking about the Parliament of England that has been dissolved by way of what we call the dissolvement of the Parliament in 1629 by King Charles II. This resulted in what we call the Petition of Rights in 1628 as a result of our previous lesson dealing with ship money, which is a result of taxation on the English subjects, not just the subjects, but the heirs, and as well as the colonists and plantations who were subjects of the English heirs and successors, based off the contract of 1606. If you read Article 15, 16 to 17, it will explicitly say that if there's any trickery done or any spoilage done on behalf of the plantation or the colonists, that the heirs and successors must put in a proclamation on behalf of that injury. And as a result of that proclamation put forth on the record, that is the obligation of the Chancellery, i.e. Lord Chancellor, to recall upon the King's conscience in lieu of conscientious law, i.e. natural law of that law that was practiced by the English heirs and successors, who we are. So as a result of the laws governing the contract based off the colonists and colonies who set these plantations, enslaved, i.e. the heirs and successors, we as subjects of the king and heirs and successors of the Kingdom of England, or i.e. the Emperor, the Empire of Albion, is our obligation to put in force that those laws that were put in place that became dormant as a result of us being heirs, not taking our proper place as exercising the governmental authority that we are obligated to do as officers of the English Stereotypical Church of England, reformed through those reformations by those de facto monarchs that were put in place as trustees of our estate, which we have proven so far in all the lessons that we've done. So if you're up to speed, then you shouldn't have a problem with what it is that I'm saying to you. But with that, let's get started. Today's lesson is going to be a beautiful lesson because we're going to show you, as we showed you in the previous lesson, that you are in the state of hell. And this hell is called the subjugation of the venues that you're subject to by way of jurisdiction, which means declared law. And the law that's declared for you is a law of what we call the courts of common pleas, because anytime you go to court, you're at the mercy of the court by way of you plead to the court. And according to law, you have the right to be tried by jury amongst your own peers. But apparently your peers are not being spoken for because you're not peers of the Lord's. Because above the House of Common Pleas is governed by the courts of exchequer. And the courts of exchequer deal with the courts of exchequer chamber, which obligation is to collect the debt for the king, which we call fee and common sukach. As you can see, as King Edgar, the people standing upon the world, which we call earth, this is what we call planet Albion. And all those who are not conscious about the king's consciousness, is his obligation to protect the Empire of Albion, i.e. planet Albion, which we call the Kingdom of England, within the king's jurisdiction, i.e. under his declared law, you are in a state of hell. And those who are sworn secrecy to these secret societies, fraternities, organizations, blogs, whatever you want to call them, they are in charge or gatekeepers to keep you in the hell. And they know this. Why? Because they understand the laws of the exchequer chamber. Okay, and we're going to show you a quick video of Alicia Keys. And they're discussing the topic of the identity that we're termed as Negro, Black, colored, Ethiopians. Archbishop went through it. If you watch his past video, part 1 and 2, he specifically break down the terms identifying the complexions, which were actually darker complexions, for lack of a better term, which were actually terminologies dealing with those who are actually Berber descent. And as you're going to see, as verbiage by Alicia Keys, that she knows more than she's saying. Because if you know the authority under the exchequer chamber, as we can see, King Edgar people standing over the exchequer chamber, which all those below that is hell. Okay, and now she's wearing the exchequer chamber, which is the information in regards to how the exchequer chamber works in regards to the state. And look at the floor of the leases on the side, y'all. Look at the floor of the leases on the side. Look at the platform. All right, if you're going to see on the crest, you'll see an X there as well. All right, go ahead, play the video, Archbishop.
Hip hop is me.
But you know what, when Malcolm X would say so-called white man, so-called black man, so-called, that means something.
They can hear it?
No.
1 second.
Or is it just me who can't hear it? Could you hear it, Archbishop? I mean, CA?
Yes.
Okay, just play it. Go ahead and play it.
Okay, yeah, you probably have to unmute your computer for you probably hear it, possibly. All right, so let me get back to it. Okay, here we go.
To me, because it's a so-called, that's a name, that's names we've been given by whoever didn't care anything about us, any of us, whichever so-called we became. So
we're just not so-called human.
Yes,
Come on, let's just go back to the basics.
That's for sure.
I love that. Let's go.
Cheers.
Okay.
All right, so as you can see, they're discussing the identity in regards to the symbolic terminology that they have disguised under Negro, Black, colored, Ethiopian, which she does not clearly identify with. But yet, she has an English name. She's subject to the English culture here, the English law, the English history, but yet she does not identify with that. She identifies with her identifying with the term a Black woman. All right, but yet she's discrediting the term Black woman as it denotes to human beings. Y'all have to look at that. All right. So without further ado, let's get to this beautiful lesson. All right. So Archbishop, bring up the Methodist Church, Methodism. Remember, these are our isms. These are methods that they created to steal your birthright. This is one of the many methods that they have instituted to steal your birthright. And two prominent beings that were actually used were one of Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. And these were two individuals who were actually enslaved under the slave masters who were at that particular time, the colonists who were given authority to be here by way of the de facto monarch under King James, who set the colonization for the Protestants and the Anglicans and the many branches that they broke it down into, which Methodism is one of them. So let's get a breakdown of what Methodism stems from. Go ahead, Archbishop.
All right. Methodism, also called the Methodist movement, is a group of historically related denominations of Protestant Christianity, which derived their doctrine of practice and belief from the life and teachings of John Wesley. George Whitefield and John's brother, Charles Wesley, were also significant early leaders in the movement. They were named Methodists for the methodical way in which they carried out their Christian faith.
Stop. It said the methodical way. I just said that. So it was the method on carrying out their religious practice. All right. And their religious practice was the disconnection from the original practice of what the origin of their faith should have went back to. Continue to read.
It says, Methodism originated as a revival movement within the 18th century Church of England and became a separate denomination after Wesley's death. The movement spread throughout the British Empire, the United States, and beyond because of vigorous missionary work, today claiming approximately 80 million adherents worldwide.
Stop. Now hit British Empire.
Slow. Excuse me, here we go.
I keep scrolling down so you see the map with the red. If they have it, I don't know if this was there. Yeah, right there. Okay. British territories in Americas from 1763 to 1776, extending much further than the 13 colonies on the Atlantic coast. So this is the territory that was governed. And now Archbishop spoke about the Negro Act of 1740. Listen to the last videos, y'all, because this is how you put it together. We're dealing with a territory expansion that not only governs Canada, it governs everything west of the what we call the Mississippi River, going up onto Ohio territory. Everything east of that is what they call the British territory. And we know the British territories are the 13 colonies, okay, which is now called America. It didn't say English colony. It said the British colonies. And the British colony were allowed by way of the charter. We're in 1763. We have to go back to 1660. The original charter allowed the original 13 colonies to set up here in what they now call America. Prior to this was England, because before you get into that, you have to go into the Anglo-Dutch wars, the end of the Netherlands wars against the called the Anglo-Dutch wars. You got to go back into that history. But for this, we're dealing with the British territories, and at this particular time, 1740, we had what we call the Negro Act of 1740, which mentioned the enslavement of Berbers and all these territories, y'all.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you had also had the Naturalization Act of 1740. You had the Plantation Act of 1740, right, which was all dealing with the Protestants and the Anglican Roman Catholic faiths settling here in North America. It goes right back to what Archbishop was showing you. One of the branches of the Protestant Anglican religion was the Methodist Church. Okay, so all these branches broke away, and these were the indoctrination imposed upon the Anglo-Saxon burghers. All right, through the Plantation Act of 1740, write that down. Naturalization Act of 1740, write that down, and the Negro Act of 1740. Because you see lit up on this map, you see South Carolina there lit up too as well. All right, it's lit up in red. So now this deals with the colonists, i.e. the plantations, who consist of the Protestants and the Anglicans, who broke away from the Roman Catholic Church through the reformation of the English Church, as we just read, going back to the Methodist Church. Now go back to Archbishop. This is how y'all have to teach the people.
All right, back on Methodism. All right,
Go back up to the top where you was. So it said right there. Go back down.
Okay.
So as you just read, it was a revival movement within the 18th century from the Church of England. Now, if you know, the Church of England was established by the House of Tudors. All right, and it became a separate denomination after Wesley's death. The movement spread throughout the British Empire and the United States, because we know the British Empire is what preceded the United States. Because prior to it being called the United States, it was called what? United Colonies. All right, let's go back to go down in history. Origin, rather.
All right. The Methodist revival began in England with a group of men, including John Wesley, 1703 to 1791, and his younger brother Charles, 1707, 1788, as a movement within the Church of England in the 18th century. The Wesley brothers founded the Holy Club at the University of Oxford, where John was a fellow and later a lecturer at Lincoln College. The club met weekly and they systematically set about living a holy life. They were accustomed to receiving communion every week, fasting regularly, abstaining from most forms of amusement and luxury frequently, visited the sick and the poor, as well as prisoners. The fellowship were branded as Methodists by their fellow students because of the way they used rule and method to go about their religious affairs.
That's fine. Okay, so as we can see, as a community, they set up in the society and start doing things that they're presumed were their customs as a branch of the Methodist Church. And we know that the origin of the Methodist Church goes back to, as you said, Mr. Wesley. All right. Now we're going to show you how this practice that were actually created from the Protestant Anglican Church through the reformation of the Church of England that reformed from the English Church of England, which we had to reform as the English Third Temple Church of England, as a result of what happened or was created through the branches created by the Protestants and the Anglicans, who are branches of the Roman Catholic Church. So what they try to do is get away from Roman Catholic Church and create new branches, but under the standard or under the foundation of the Church of England. Because we know that the Church of England was at war with the Roman Catholic Church, going way back to the invasion of Roman under what we call Agricola and Tacticus father-in-law, which we're going to discuss, but not today. All right. So let's move from this, because we understand that the Methodist Church, with the branch of the Protestant Church, was set up here in 1740 and under the Plantation Act of Naturalization Act under the minors of the House of Stewards. Now let's show you how the English have somehow got caught up in this mess. And we're gonna run into two guys, what's his name? Absalom Jones and Richard Allen.
Yeah.
Archbishop.
All right, so we're gonna go to Richard Allen first, or Absalom Jones, or do you want to go to the church?
Go to church first.
Okay. All right, so the African Methodist Episcopal Church. All right, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, usually called the AME Church or AME, is a predominantly African-American Methodist denomination. Now, before I continue, we already know that African American is a misnomer for the ancient Berbers. All right, so it adheres to Wesleyan Armenian theology and has a connectional polity. The African Methodist Episcopal Church is the first independent Protestant denomination to be founded by Black people.
Say it again. Say it again.
It says the African Methodist Episcopal Church is the first independent Protestant denomination to be founded by Black people, though it welcomes and has members of all ethnicities. It was founded by the Reverend Richard Allen, 1760 to 1831, later elected and ordained first bishop in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in 1816, from calling together of 5 Black congregations of the earlier established Methodist Episcopal Church, originally founded December 1784 in the famous Christmas Conference, first of their general conferences at Lovely Lane Chapel Meeting House in Old Baltimore town. On the East Coast, Middle Atlantic States area, in the first general conference, who wanted to escape the discrimination that was commonplace in society. It was
okay. That's cool. That's cool. Let's move to the next point about Richard Allen. So now we already discussed the origin of Methodist Church, and we have shown that from the Methodist Church, the African Methodist Church was created by Richard Allen. Richard Allen was a slave, okay? But he had to get in where he fit in. So he started practicing the religion that was forced upon him. Let's read about him.
All right, Richard Allen, Bishop. Richard Allen, February 14, 1760 to March 26, 1831, was a minister, educator, writer, and one of America's most active and influential Black leaders. In 1794, he founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME, the first independent Black denomination in the United States. He opened his first AME church in 1794 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Elected the first bishop of the AME Church in 1816, Allen focused on organizing a denomination in which free Black people could worship without racial oppression and enslaved people could find a measure of dignity. He worked to upgrade the social status of the Black community, organizing Sabbath schools to teach literacy and promoting national organizations to develop political strategies.
Now this is 1794, 4 years after the Naturalization Act and the Naturalization Act and Plantation Act of 1740. 4 years later, all right? 4 years later, now here come Richard Allen, now forced to practice the Methodist faith as a result of his not being able to practice his own faith, which we're going to see he wanted to get back to. All right, we don't, Archbishop.
All right, so to the ministry.
Yes, sir.
Allen was qualified as a preacher and admitted in December 1784 as the famous Christmas Conference, the founding and considered to be the first general conference of Methodist Episcopal Church in North America. Held at the old original Lovely Lane Chapel Meeting House on the narrow lane off modern South Calvert in German, now Redwood Streets in Old Baltimore Town, largest town city in Portland, Maryland. He was one of the 2 Black attendees of the conference, along with legendary Black Harry Hoysier. Neither could vote during deliberations in Lovely Lane. Allen was then allowed to leave services at 5 a.m., which was attended mostly by Black people. But as preacher, Allen had family responsibilities, eschewing future Bishop Francis Asbury, Irishman Robert Strawbridge, and Black Harry Hosier's practices of horseback circuit riding routes to rural country churches and Bible stations, visiting far-off parsons, and living in a saddle. So he moved northeast to Philadelphia, a center of free Black people and the biggest city in the United States, and second only to London in the English-speaking world of the now fractured British Empire.
Wow. Did y'all hear that? So our kingdom has been severed. All right, it has been severed. As you can see, it was second biggest to London. All right, and we know London was, according to that history dealing with House Stewards, were their headquarters. But yet they had jurisdiction over in these territories. All right, keep reading on. Read the next paragraph, Archbishop.
It says, by 2 years later, in 1786, Allen became a preacher at St. George Methodist Episcopal Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but was restricted to the early morning services. As he attracted more Black congregants, the church vestry ordered them to be held in a separate area for worship. Allen regularly preached on the Commons, which is Central Park, near the church, slowly gaining a congregation of nearly 50 and supporting himself with a variety of odd jobs. Allen and Absalom Jones was also a Methodist preacher, resented the white congregants' leaders' segregation of Blacks for worship and prayer. They decided to leave St. George's to create an independent, self-reliant worship place for African Americans of the large cosmopolitan capital city. Unfortunately, that brought on some opposition from the white church, as well as the more established Black people of the community who wanted to merely fit in or not stir up any hard feelings. In protest in 1787, the same famous summer with the Constitutional Convention, holding locked-in sessions in the old Pennsylvania State House, now frequently called Independence Hall, with delegates from the 13 original states, Allen and Jones led the Black members out of St. George Methodist Episcopal Church. They formed the Free African Society, FAS, a non-denominational mutual aid society that assisted fugitive enslaved people from the South and new migrants coming into the city of Philadelphia. Allen, along with Absalom Jones, William Gray, and William Welker, found an available lot on 6th Street near Lombard Street. Allen negotiated a price and purchased this lot in 1787 on which to build a church, but it was several years before they had a building. Now currently occupied by Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, it is the oldest parcel of real estate in the United States that has been owned continuously by African Americans. Over time, pay attention to this next part, brothers and sisters. Over time, most of the FAS members chose to return to the spiritual home of their youth and forefathers and affiliate with the neighborhood parishes of the former Church of England. As it slowly recovered from the wartime bitterness of the revolution after the British ministry government, ending the war in the Treaty of Paris, ratified in 1783 by the Confederation Congress in Annapolis.
Well said. Now, as we can see, you will see the Treaty of Paris was a result of the hardship and the taxes that the House of King George, monarch with King George, was putting on them. We know that passed from him from Queen Anne. Queen Anne descended back through what we call the restoration of the crown to Charles II, after we had what we call the English Civil War. The English Civil War was called, before you had the English Civil War, you had what we call the War of the Three Kingdoms. Before you had the War of the Three Kingdoms, you had what we call the War of the Bishops. The War of the Bishops was a result of King Charles II petitioning Parliament to collect taxes on the colonists, i.e. the plantations, when there was no time of war. This particular tax was called ship money. Why do I say ship money? Because you living in townships right now. You're subject to the Township
Act.
Township Act, 1798. All right.
1790.
Now, when you go to Article 22nd of July 2nd, 1776 Constitution, which was amended in 1844, then the last was amended in 1947. Now, the 1947 Constitution of New Jersey, as well as the 1844 Constitution of New Jersey, does not mention anything about England. It only deals with the state of New Jersey. But we know if you go back to the original Constitution of July 2nd, 1776, Article 22, it clearly shows you under the encumbrances or disclosure clause that the states themselves, which were not states at that particular time in 1776, they were colonies. And they created their own charter within the jurisdiction of the Kingdom of England, because it says that the laws of the Kingdom of England will remain in force hereto as there was provided by in the statute, until appealed by the legislator law. It didn't say appealed, it didn't say dissolved, it said amended or changed, which had been done by way of Title 16, Chapter 1, Section 28, right, state under the charge of Great Britain, saved from repeal. This is the 2020 statute, y'all. That means that those encumbrances under the July 2nd, 1776 Constitution, dealing with the King James, who was the de facto monarch as a trustee for the English heirs and successors, because he was the only king of Scotland. He was not the first king of England. He only got that authority when it passed by way of cognatic successor, because the House of Tudors had no male heirs.
That's right.
You have to know this history. All right. So as a result of the Treaty of Paris of 1783, when King George gave up authority, that means that Britain should have left. Right. That was no more obligation for Great Britain, because Great Britain's no more in the picture. But apparently that's not the case, because they got a 2020 statute that says right state under the charter of Great Britain. So as a result of the violation of the 1606 charters, and by way of the English Temple Church making a proclamation of a state of emergency of the English heirs and successors are being extinct as a result of the taking over of our meetings by way of incorporating us, the English citizens, by way of the Township Act. Because if you go to Article 10 of the July 2nd, 1776, it clearly states, and I quote, that all the captains and the inferior officers should be selected by all the captains and inferior officers should be selected by the militia and the counties. Except the captains were selected by the militias and the counties, and this would be done by inferior officers. Inferior officers. The higher officers are called the legislative, the council, and the assembly. So the higher is the legislative, council, and assembly, known as New Jersey State Legislature, and the inferiors are the counties created by what we call captains. The first thing you run into when you're in trouble is what? Call a captain.
The captain. Yep.
Now, captain's supposed to be on ships, am I right? Why are you using the term for a captain for a officer of a particular territorial that's not on the sea? That don't make any sense. This is why, because you're operating what we call Admiralty Maritime Law, because they called you a militia. It's a militia, so you're subject to a militia by inferior officers headed by a captain. in the county, and according to 48.1-6 of New Jersey Revised Statute, it says that the counties, the municipalities, the townships, the boroughs, the villages, etc., are not legislatively construed. They're only there for reference purposes, which means that they're arbitrary, capricious, and outside of the law. So if you go back to the original Constitution, July 2nd, 1776, it says that the Kingdom of England and its laws by way of statute are remain in force. But yet, by way of allowing the state by overthrowing the government on July 2nd, 1776, by way of creating what they call the Provincial Congress. Provincial Congress was created by way of dissolving parliamentary rule that was ruled under here by Parliament by way of William Livingston, illegitimate son of Benjamin Franklin, who was the lawyers to the crown. And when they created that Constitution for themselves, read the clause, they said the only thing we won't accept is things that are repugnant to this New Jersey Charter, which is the Constitution. That's the only thing they can accept is what they created for themselves. Why? Because the laws of England were still in place. So they couldn't have those rights for English because it was preserved for them. This is why they got away from their authority as colonies by amending that Constitution on September 20, 1776, which says that which is the incumbents clause, the disclosure clause, which clearly states that provided that if there's ever a reconciliation between Great Britain, there is, why? Title 16, Chapter 1, Section 28, right? Stating the charge of Great Britain, safe from repeal, placing religious corporations and corporations in place up. What does this mean? Means that because of the English church and governed by its trustees have become extinct, they have now transferred from religious corporations to just corporations, i.e. 501c3s. They're just regular corporations. They're just what they call abstract religious societies. It's now based off any concrete religious law, which we bring you to what we call the visible church versus the invisible church. We're about to get into that.
And that'll be for the part 2 that we're going to go ahead and get started here momentarily, brothers and sisters. So with that being said, please pay attention to what the King had just said, because you're not going to get this by anyone else. And with that being said, part 2 is going to be the kicker, because once again, we're getting ready for the new year. And with new years come new rewards, more new things that we can put into action. And in this case, we're going to be continuing to keep showing you that this here is the kingdom of heaven, empire of Albion, what you call planet Earth.